Two little sidebar stories before I jump in. As we were yelling out things to one another and yelling out our things to the crowd, it reminded me of a time when I was a youth minister and took a group to Denver, Colorado, and we were doing work at the Colorado Christian Home, the Tennyson Center for Children, which was for neglected and abused kids. And hard work, and some of the evenings we did fun stuff. And one of the, to kind of give a little bit of my age, one of the fun things, we went to a Colorado Rockies baseball game in the evening. They were still using Denver's Mile High Stadium, so that dates me a little bit. And so they did this cheer on one side of the stadium that would yell, "Go," and on the other side of the stadium they would yell, "Rockies." And one of the young boys in the youth group asked me what they were yelling. And I said, "You don't know that Denver is the home of the Cola Wars. They're yelling Coke, and we're saying Pepsi." And so every time it came time for us to yell, he would say, "Pepsi!" Every time we were supposed to say Rockies. And this lady turned around and said, "Why are you yelling Pepsi?" He goes, "This is the birthplace of the Cola Wars." And she went on to correct him, and he looked at me, and I got these eyes with daggers in them of like, I made him yell these horrible, awful things. So just made me think of that story. So it's a quick sidebar. Let's have a word of prayer together. Gracious God, we ask for your spirit and your heart to be with us as this word of Scripture is open to us, as we open our minds and hearts that is pleasing to you. We share all these things in your name. Amen. At the very beginning of Ted Lasso, one of the things that he says about his philosophy, he says, "My philosophy is not about wins and losses. It's about helping these young men be the best versions of themselves on and off the pitch," or as he first said, on and off the field. His main goal was not about winning and losing. It was about making these people playing better individuals in the long run. Now, when Ted said this, one of the things that he has within his psyche is what I would call a concept, the communal ethic. The idea is that you perform, you engage, you participate, you are there because of the communal goal rather than your individual goal. And that's one of the things that Ted does throughout the entire 3 seasons of Ted Lasso, is putting together what I would call a communal ethic, a communal behavior system, a communal way of thinking and being with one another. And a communal ethic oftentimes is one of the hardest things to get a group of people to understand and embody. There's always a rogue personality, a person that wants to do it their way versus the collective way. It's the hardest thing to get people to all collectively say, this is what we want to do because we know it's the right way to go. Now, from the very beginning, Ted has rogue personalities, and probably the one most rogue personality is Jamie Tartt. It's all about him. He turns around and says, "It's all about me," when he scores a goal. And even when Ted tries to pass on his solutions of communal ethic, Jamie doesn't want to have anything to do with it early on in the series. A communal ethic is a hard thing when we have to realize that my life isn't just about me. My life is somehow wrapped up into the lives of other people. And when we kind of see our purpose that way, it's a whole different way of thinking about the goals we make and the things we want to achieve and the things we want to be a part of our lives in one way or another. Now, in our American culture, it's one of the hardest things to get people to be a part of, and that would say a communal ethic. We have within our culture what I call the rugged individualism, is that people want to do it their way and their right and their path for doing things. So much so that we have siloed ourselves in so many different pockets of how people think. We gravitate to extremist thinking, or this particular party, or this particular group of people because they think like us. Even in the social media world, like Facebook, the algorithms end up putting us in like-minded groups of how we think. And even when we throw something out there, typically more than not, we get people that think like us responding back to us about the things we posted that might be political or challenging or whatever it might be. We typically get more affirmation than maybe negative comments, unless we're on more of a public sphere within social media. Heather McGhee, I've mentioned once before, is the author of the book, The Sum of Us. It's a book that deals with all the issues of systemic injustice that happens in our country. And she talks about oftentimes when a person is not thinking communally, they'll think this way. They'll say, I will help other people only if it means I don't give up something that I've earned myself. Only then will I help others, as long as I can ensure that I'm not giving up something, because if I give up something, I'm going to lose something. And Heather McGhee in her book clearly states and shows that we invest all facets of our communal and national life together, we benefit more as a whole across cultural, racial, and socioeconomic boundaries that we have created for ourselves. That if we can somehow think more communally versus individually, that we can be a greater thriving community and country if we're willing to let down the things like power and privilege and control and personal self-gain. If somehow we can get past that kind of thinking, there is the potential for we as a society to be better off with one another. But it's hard to convince someone of that. It's hard to convince someone to think communally rather than individually. We typically think me first before we think of us. Now, there is an African concept that's been around for a long, long time that gets at what I would think of as this communal ethic. It is the African concept of Ubuntu. And you may or may not know about that concept. But it's a person through other people is a way to think about that concept. One recognizes the infinite worth in everyone. It's not simply a way of behaving, it is a way of being. My humanity is bound up in your humanity. We are interconnected with one another. I am because you are is another way of thinking about that concept. Desmond Tutu, after South Africa had its first democratic election process, Desmond Tutu renamed and coined a phrase for South Africa as the Rainbow Nation, with the idea that for the first time, there was a chance for them to blend their cultures together rather than having been one particular way of being and the others are suppressed and pushed down. A phrase that's often used in Ubuntu thinking is the phrase, I see you. When you come up and have a conversation with someone, you'll go up to them and say, I see you. Not that you're right in front of me, but I see your gifts. I see your worth. I recognize the power of you. And because I see the power of you, you can see the power in me. And they would say, I see you. And they would respond, I see you. It's almost as like when you look into the eyes of the person, you look past the eyeballs, and you're somehow seeing into the depths of their soul, at least trying to, and seeing beyond the surface and seeing the in-depth part of someone else. There's so much we can learn from this kind of African way of thinking about what it means to be community. I'm only me because of you. I'm not a self-made person. We have the myth within our country is that we are self-made individuals. I make my own life and I do my own education. I create my own family life. Is we don't do that. We are products of everyone else that has influenced us. If we really think about it, between teachers and mentors and other individuals that span across our lifetime, those individuals have helped create who we are. We have to see the value and worth in others and how it's made who we are, the very person that we are now. Now, in the series, the 3 seasons of Ted Lasso, there are numerous places where Ted Lasso's attempt to create communal ethic begins to creep into the various characters in the show. One of them is Isaac, who becomes the captain of the football team once Roy Kent retires and passes off the captain's kind of band that he gets to wear. And Isaac was kind of one-dimensional. He goes, I can only think about one thing, do one thing. But at one point in season 3, they head to Amsterdam, and that's really a phenomenal episode. It's almost one of the best episodes in the entire 3 seasons, is the trip to Amsterdam. And when their friendly is over, that's their exhibition match is over, they have to decide what the team is going to do after the game. They kind of get a night out. And they have all these options. And Isaac says, we're going to do one thing as a team. We're only going to do one thing. We're not going to do separate things. We're not going to divide up and go different ways. We're going to do one thing together. Now, they had some pretty interesting options, I'll say that things they could do. And they were battling through the night. And it just seems like it got them nowhere. They just couldn't seem to get a unified process of what they were going to do. And the cool thing is Isaac, in the end, decides that instead of going to these places, the things they wanted to go, they end up having the ultimate pillow fight as a team. It was just a great scene as they're running around and throwing pillows and feathers are flying. And just a great scene in terms of, we could have gone and done this. We could have gone and done this. And they end up as a whole team having a pillow fight as adult football players, which I thought was really kind of a cool scene. There is a place where Keely, starts out as the girlfriend of Jamie Tart, ends up kind of doing some marketing work for the team, ends up developing her own company along the way for marketing and production of particular products and helping the players develop their identities and their presence in the wider community. Now, Keely is an interesting character. She seems to have kind of a struggle at the beginning of who is she and why is she in the series? And as you go along, she develops a greater strength for who she is as the 3 seasons evolve. And at one point, she hires to her own company, once it's established, an old friend by the name of Shandy. And I don't like Shandy very much in the series. She's kind of interesting, and she kind of does her own thing, and she kind of makes some dicey decisions along the way. And I think, my thinking is, had Keely started her company at the very beginning and hired Shandy, Shandy would have stayed on with her company. But over time, her connection to Ted and the team of Richmond and all the players and all the influences that the Richmond team has on Keely, by the time she hires Shandy, who's a friend and thinks she has some gifts and talents, by the time Shandy makes some particular decisions that Keely's not really excited about, she finally decides to fire Shandy, which is another interesting piece in of itself. But she recognizes that Shandy doesn't have this wider idea of what it means to work together. She just has this individualized way of thinking. As long as it gets us profit for the company, that's what we care about. And Keely realizes that the purpose of her company is more than just making money. It's about paying attention to the lives of those they are to care about along the way as they help market them and share their lives with other people. Then there's a scene where the episode where Rebecca loses her father. Her father passes away. It's a scene of the funeral, which is a powerful piece within the series. And the entire team dresses up in the most formal outfits they can in their respect for Rebecca and to pay their respects to Rebecca and to her father's passing. And the one person that doesn't get off the bus at the time and is not there is Ted Lasso. He had encountered another one of his panic attacks. All the rest of the team sits down and they get situated and the funeral begins, and Rebecca is asked to speak and give a eulogy for her father, which she really doesn't feel equipped or want to do. She gets up to the microphone, but before she speaks, Ted Lasso makes his way in and he opens the door, and everyone knows that he makes the door opens, it's loud and creaky, and everyone looks back and, oh gosh, Ted's finally arrived, and he kind of sits at the back. And then Rebecca begins to attempt to speak and give a eulogy for her father, and she is wordless. She can't think of anything to say. And then she begins thinking about the words of a song. never gonna give you up, never gonna let you down. And she tries to sing these words, and she can't do it. And on the very back row, when everyone's looking around at this most awkward moment in this funeral service, Ted on the back row begins to pick up the words of the song and begins to sing it when Rebecca can't sing those words herself. And then as Ted begins to sing, some of the other players, and then the entire congregation that's gathered there for the funeral service sings that song till its conclusion. And when the song ends, Rebecca walks off, and even the organist is playing the music in the background. Rebecca, who felt isolated in that moment, felt alone in that moment. The moment Ted began to sing, she recognized she was a part of a community way bigger than she ever had imagined in her life. And then there's Jamie Tart, the selfish guy. Ted had come up with this idea in season 3 of what he did not know is called total football. It had to do with triangles. He has this weird scene in Amsterdam where he has this vision about triangles, and it ends up becoming this concept that Beard says is total football. And Ted is sold on this concept. He had this vision. He's going to make sure and see it through, and begins to teach this concept of total football to the team. And they're not getting it. And when they go to the field and actually play their games, they play horrible and they're losing by significant amounts. But Ted is determined not to give up on the concept of total football. And they end up playing a match against West Ham, kind of their nemesis. That's where Nate ends up being the coach. And they go down 3-0 in the first half. And they come into the locker room, it's bad, and then Jamie Tart finally says, "Can I say something, Coach?" He says, "Sure." He goes, "I think you're all doing it wrong when it comes to total football. And I'm doing it. Maybe we're all doing it wrong." And next thing we know, Jamie Tart, the quintessential solo, it's me personality, makes his way to the marker board where there's little magnets that represent the players. And then he kind of takes over almost in a coach-like way. He says, "I should be here, and you should be here, and you don't play to me, you play through me." And there's this whole scene where he kind of describes everything on this marker board with the little magnetic dots that represent the players. Then he steps away from the marker board, and all the players, "Well, that makes sense. That makes sense." And they go out in the second half, and they don't necessarily win, but they score one goal. They end up being 3-1 at the end. But the one goal is this magnanimous moment where the team gets the concept of total football. And it's just this grand moment where Jamie, who thought about himself at the very beginning of season 1, by the end of season 3, steps back and even using the best of his gifts, incorporates the gifts of others so the team can succeed in ways beyond individual talent. Which reminded me as I was watching that scene, the scene where Ted said early on when he was struggling with his wanting to be an individual, he says, "If you just figure out some way to turn the me into us, the sky's the limit for you." Jamie finally gets it with total football. Rebecca realizes it at a team meeting, or an owner's meeting. There is this guy from Nigeria that wants to develop this elite soccer league, and all the owners of all the teams, and wants to create this elite league. And there's this soliloquy by Rebecca when she begins to realize and talk about the importance of the team, that when these elite teams, if they form their own elite league, it's about the owners and their money and what they can make. And she realizes that as this particular league gets formed, we take away the very game that people love away from them, the ability to afford to go to the games and be able to cheer and be a part of the teams they love from their hometowns and from their neighborhoods. It's a powerful scene in which she allows football is not just a club that she owns, that she is a steward of this team that the community loves, and how important it is to realize she's no longer an owner to make money, but a steward for the community that's powerful. And then there's Nate. Nate has this goal of being able to have his own team and to coach his own team and to be in charge of things and do things the way he wants to be done rather than being told how it's to work. Nate gets his opportunity and coaches the team of West Ham. And he does interesting things when he becomes the coach. He actually tries to employ Ted Lasso concepts with West Ham, except Nate doesn't understand the communal ethic. He only understands his individualized way of doing something. So when you employ communal ethic methods in an individualistic way, it doesn't work. So as an example, Ted formed the Diamond Dogs. It was this intimate way for these guys to talk and share and work out problems and personal issues together. And Nate tried to do that at West Ham. He tried to call them the Wolfhounds. And it went horribly wrong. And within 2 minutes, he says, "We're never doing this again." He was given the opportunity to coach as a Premier League team. And yet, as much as he got all his wishes fulfilled, he never felt more lonely in his life. He realized that when he stepped out of Ted Lasso's communal ethic, that it's the very thing he wanted. He didn't realize he wanted it until he didn't have it in his life. He was willing to come back with forgiveness, come back into the team fold, and be an assistant to the kit man. It was that important for him to come back to that kind of communal understanding, to take the lowest spot in the team positions or team roles, just for him to be a part of that community experience. And then the final example is when Sam Obisanya opens a restaurant, and in season 3 it's vandalized because of some of his political activism on social media. And he was about ready to give up on the whole restaurant thing altogether. And his father had visited from out of the country to come check on him and to see how his soccer was going, his football was going, and how the restaurant was going, and realized when he got there the restaurant had been vandalized, and Sam did not want to take his father to the restaurant. But after the game was over, he goes, "Dad, you want to see the restaurant?" He goes, "I do. Even if it's vandalized, I want to see what you were doing." They arrive at the restaurant, and the entire team is in there revamping, remodeling, fixing up the restaurant, even without Sam's knowledge. The team bought into the communal ethic as we are a team. We are family with one another. We will show up for you. Even when you think we will not show up for you, we will be there for you. Now, some of this concept that Ted does, this communal ethic, is posted all over the place on the grounds of AFC Richmond's campus. You had signs like "Believe" right over the door of Ted's office. You have a poster that says, "Just keep trying." You have another one that says hashtag in all caps, "We are Richmond." Another poster says, "Winners don't quit, quitters don't win." And another one in a different language, "Gregarious firmus victoria," steadfast victory. Victory is not in the moment. It's the steadfast, elongated track we choose together that creates victory, not with the wins and losses, but the victory of within and what we do for one another. On this day, we call it Palm Sunday, the beginning of a week that culminates Jesus' ministry on earth. And some things we know about Jesus leading up to this day is that he always points people away from himself and towards God. Jesus always addresses systemic injustice of his day and offers teachings and actions that model a different way of being community. He prepares disciples, followers, and those impacted by his ministry to lead a movement, even without him around. Jesus was a community organizer that cultivated a vision of communal life, a world that encouraged a communal ethic, an ethic of respect, of affirmation, of gift sharing and genuine love for others. And by creating this kind of community, he fashioned what I would call justice power that organized people around efforts from the vulnerable and raising the standard of living for everyone rather than just for a few. Following the game in Manchester City, that was the game where, or it's West Ham, the game after West Ham, where they learned the concept of total football that Jamie had taught in the locker room at halftime. When the game is over and they scored the one goal, one of my favorite scenes in all 3 seasons is when Trent Krim comes running in toward the locker room at the end of the game. And he's just filled with this excitement and energy. He says, "Ted, Ted, Ted." He goes, "What, Trent, what?" He goes, "It's going to work. Total football. It's the lasso way. You haven't switched tactics at all with this total football. You've done everything. You've done this over 3 seasons by slowly and surely building a club-wide culture of trust and support through thousands of imperceptible moments, all leading to this inevitable conclusion. Total football. It's going to work." And he's giddy and runs out. It's one of my favorite scenes that Trent Krim gets communal ethic, not just on the surface, but the deep underworkings of what Ted was doing all along with one-on-one conversations, locker room speeches, support of individual people with their lives, of challenges going on in their life, little encouragements in the field and from the sidelines. But what if a Christian, or at least an early follower, came up to Jesus and said, "Jesus, it's going to work. This whole kingdom of God, beloved community, the Jesus way. You haven't switched tactics from the beginning. You've done this over 3 years by slowly and surely building a culture of trust and support through thousands of imperceptible moments, all leading to this inevitable conclusion. It's going to work." But Jesus would turn around and say to you, much like the writing on the manuscript that you see on the cover of the bulletin today, Jesus would say, "It was never about me. It never was."